everyone. Welcome back. Expanding the zone. This is show 19. We're going to be talking expectations here this evening. I'm Shane Combs. He's Matt Combs. We're excited to come with this topic that we think is going to play a pretty important role in leadership. I want to let you know kind of how I arrived at this topic. Matt, this is such a time right now where the bubble, the NBA is coming down to the playoffs. Some teams with the expectation of championship or bust, others looking to advance, others just looking to get in, some looking to maybe, if we're being quite honest, tank and get into the lottery and get a little bit better pick. I think in Major League Baseball, we're starting to get right around that time to where, believe it or not, we're about a third of the way through, and it's far enough along to figure out, is your favorite team doing well, not doing well? I think a Tiger at the PGA, all of these different things that I just talk a lot of natural sports with people I hang out with. And it's really got me thinking about expectations. And when I hear people's opinions, I think a lot of it has to do with what did you expect going in. So I guess the first thing I would ask you, just in saying welcome and getting going here this week, what is it about expectations, setting them, maintaining them, evaluating them, that you think becomes really, really important in the land of leadership?
Well, I think we're going to talk about several different angles on this tonight, I'm sure. With you just mentioned some things like goal setting and how you arrive maybe at your expectations or whatever. But what it comes down to for me is I've just always been a believer that nothing great's ever really been accomplished without high expectations. I think for the most part, anything that's an outstanding achievement, a great accomplishment, whatever, to me, probably started with some level of high expectations. I remember once hearing that Google started in a garage with two Stanford students doing like their graduate thesis or research project or something.
Wow. Yeah.
And basically it started in a garage, and obviously we've seen what it's become, but I'm not saying that those guys, when they started, could have in their wildest dreams imagined probably what it actually became, but I'm guessing their expectations were higher than the garage. I think it's like
Right.
They didn't think, hey, if we do a good job here, we can clean this place up, hang up a couple posters. I mean, they had something bigger in mind. And so, I think all greatness probably starts with high expectations from its leaders. And then I know we're going to talk tonight about how you relay that to the people that you're leading, how goals are set, how you handle success and failure. A lot of those things go into it. But I think ultimately it starts with high expectations.
Yeah, no doubt. I think this is going to be a really fun thing. We want to welcome everybody through Buzzsprout, Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, listening to us on the podcast app, as well as here on YouTube with SVC Sports Zone. Shane, really appreciate all the support. So, Matt, here on show 19, I want to just jump right into it this week. I mentioned some of those things I start to evaluate, and I start to think about, well, what do I deem success, or what do I deem failure? Well, a lot of times it's completely where my mind was heading in. So people know we're big Cincinnati Reds fans. So, okay, they're right around 500. Well, some years we'd be tickled to death, right? That, we're 20 games in the season, we're not out of it yet. Where a year like this, maybe expectations are a little bit higher, a little bit frustrating, wish we won just a little bit more. Tiger going into the PGA. Well, if you were expecting him to win by Friday afternoon, you'd be disappointed. Where if you were looking at it as, hey, the guy's really only had one start. I'd like to see him play 4 healthy rounds, get going, and see if he can really have a nice, 3, 4, 5 month run here and some real big tournaments. I think of the bubble. I mentioned in the opening there about playoffs or championship, and on where do you set the bar? So I guess the first thing I would ask you, because goodness, you've had quite a run there at Benton County, 20 plus years of success. I look at it as, what did you think when you started? Not just in terms of the overall program, but maybe year to year. And don't you think it has something to do with that expectation versus result that you'll hear me talk so much about tonight, in terms of kind of how people react? Kind of goes back to what they had in mind when they got started, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think what's funny about that is when you say how people react, I assume you're meaning sort of like fans
Well, fans, parents, administration, yeah,
right,
across the board, yeah.
right. There's a certain level. I'll never forget when I interviewed for my first job. This wasn't at the school that I'm at now, but I can remember the AD said, we won 3 games last year, and if we could do that again, it'd be quite an accomplishment. So they had a certain level of expectation, and oftentimes, though, the expectation of the actual leader or whoever's in the fight, so to speak, whether it be like a coach, a player, whatever, I think a lot of times their expectations are probably higher, or I would like to think they're higher than that of many times the fans or who's watching. Now, maybe that's not always the case. I know, for me, I've always felt like my level of expectation, because I've had people say to me before, hey, you guys, maybe overachieved this year, did this and that. And I've never really felt that way because my level of expectation's always been, pretty high in what we want to do. But I think sometimes at the professional ranks, maybe that's reversed a little bit. I think sometimes maybe the people involved in an organization don't expect as much as maybe their fans expect from them. And that's where you get, maybe you get a little bit of the opposite of that at that level. I'm not sure, but it's definitely, I think successful leaders and successful teams and organizations or whatever, like I said, have really high expectations and probably a lot of times higher expectations than what those from the outside have for them.
Yeah, Matt, when you hear the word process, I know in the NBA world, if we have some basketball fans listening, the 76ers were known, trust the process and all that, Joel Embiid and so forth. And you'll hear Alabama football use that term a lot. And I think people in some terminology all kind of have that in their vocabulary. What's that mean to you when you hear process? Maybe give us a meaning and tell us how you use it, if you even use it at all.
Well, I think process, okay, in itself is crucial. I do. I think that people have stolen the term though and misused it in some ways, and I'll explain what I mean. You can't be successful without a plan of some kind, and that plan involves, a process. How are we going to get better today? How are we going to get better long term, or what's that going to look like long term? I guess if we get a little bit better every day and we value that process, we honor that process. I think where I get frustrated with people using process sometimes is when it becomes almost a cop out in terms of an excuse for failure, basically to take the pressure off maybe, or to say, hey, you'll hear people say, well, hey, I know we're on a losing streak right now, or this hasn't worked, or this hasn't, but it's part of the process. We're growing as a team. We're getting better. And sometimes those things are true. And I think sometimes though, let's face it, if you've ever been a fan of a small market professional team who tries to tell you after 4 or 5, 6 straight losing seasons, hey, just hang with us. There's a process here. You start to wonder what that process is.
Mm.
And I think sometimes you start to wonder, is there a process, or is that just an excuse to keep us hanging on? I think sometimes people, where I guess disagree with it is when many people who feel like if you're process driven, you can't also care about results. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I still think results can be important, but even if you're a process driven person. And, I heard an interview with a coach once. It was either a small college coach or a high school coach on one of the podcasts I listened to. And he said, we're a process driven team. We preach process all the time to our kids. And he said, because we do that, if we lose and we get upset about a loss, or if we win and we celebrate a win, then we're basically contradicting ourselves. We can't do that because we've preached process to our team. So we can't react at all to a result. We can't get upset about a loss. We can't celebrate a win. And I couldn't disagree more with that. I don't think that at all sends a contradictory message. I think you can value a process and you can preach that to your team without lying to yourself, basically, because let's face it, that's what it is, lying to yourself and saying, it doesn't really matter if we win or lose, because it does matter if you win or lose, and it always matters if you win or lose. If you're a competitor, no matter what you're doing, it matters if you win or lose. Depending on what level of athletics you are, your job could depend on whether you win or lose, right?
Sure, no doubt about it, yeah.
So to say that the results don't matter is silly. And to sit there and say, well, if you care about results, then you're not driven by the process. That's silly too, because I know most coaches who care about winning and losing also have a plan and a process that they care about. And when they do lose, let's say, they come back and say, hey, we got to get back to practice tomorrow and figure out what we did wrong and try to correct it. That's the process. That's the process you go through. So I don't see why you have to sacrifice one to have the other. I don't know what your opinion on that is, but that's sort of the way I've always looked at that.
Well, I'm fascinated by that, and I've got a question on down the agenda that I'm going to come back to and ask it in a different way, and that's when I'm going to comment a little bit more. But I want to set it up by doing this. I want to ask you two separate questions here in terms of extremes, because I think what happens is we're finding in leadership, so much of the answer lies with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? It's
Right.
hard to always just say this is the answer or that is the answer. It's usually some sort of a mixture in the middle. So I want to talk extremes to you. The first one is going too low. And when I say too low, I'm talking about low expectations. How do you, in terms of you almost set up not to reach the full potential? The answer is a little bit obvious here in terms of the danger of that, but don't you think some people almost use it? I heard the term that I had written down here, that people use it as an excuse or a cop-out. You were talking there in the process. Do you feel like the connection to being too low in expectations can sometimes set up for that failure, in terms of people almost want to set it up to where, well, gosh, I hate to say I'm going to do this and then I don't, I look kind of like I failed. I'll kind of set the bar a little bit lower, or we'll almost set ourselves up to appear that we are doing better than we really are. Does that make sense to you when I talk about low expectation?
I think one of the dangers is, when you start setting goals, is when you put, like, say it's a sports team, okay? When you start putting like a number on your success, like, well, if we win a certain number of games, we are quote unquote successful. One, because sometimes you can basically set the bar too low, and even doing that, you might say, hey, a high school basketball team or something, if we win 14 games, that's a pretty good year. And all of a sudden you're 14-2. What does that mean? You can just lose the
Right.
rest? I mean, so sometimes you undershoot it and you set the bar a little too low. And then, but I think you're talking more in terms of where people maybe do it on purpose to sort of save face, or to, to make it appear something different than it is. And it goes back to what we talked about before, where as a leader, if you are worried, if your number one concern is sort of perception and what it looks like rather than what it is. I think it was last week's show, or maybe before, we talked about, or no, it was the Pet Peeve show, where I said, I hate it when what it appears to be becomes way more important than what it actually is.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to ask yourself, in a little bit of this COVID crisis we're in right now, are the decisions being made when it comes to athletics right now, whether it be college football leagues canceling, or whether it be, will high school sports play or not, are those decisions being made for health and safety, or are they being made for perception and public pressure and what it's going to look like? So, like, my point to all that is, I think sometimes that's just poor leadership in general, when you get wrapped up in that. So if you're a coach, let's say, and you're trying to maybe dress up a pig, so to speak, and say, hey, look, this wasn't that bad, look at this, then you're probably worried about the wrong things, aren't you? I mean, you're worried about what it looks like rather than what you're really trying to accomplish.
Well, you are, and the one of the things that come to my mind is my golf game. Okay, I'm about a bogey golfer. I always say, on an incredible day, good enough to shoot low 80s. On a terrible day, bad enough to shoot low 100s. It's a lot of times my expectation going in, maybe it's the course I play, maybe it's the tees. I know sometimes when I play with you and some of the other guys that are better than me, sometimes I'll play a tee that might be right on my edge or a little over my head, or or sometimes you're going to play that easier golf course or whatever. Maybe I'm playing real well the last couple of times out, and I go out and I'm going to shoot this today. It's funny how when I come in, not to sound non-competitive, with a lower expectation, a lot of times I kind of relax and the round starts to take off and I start to play well early. And you see where other times you've played really well, you come in, hey, I want to get off to a good start. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're 5 over after 3 and you're thinking, oh no, here goes the round. You see what I'm saying? I think we do that sometimes in leadership when we set expectations for our team or when we set expectations for our staff. In terms of a business goal or a score in terms of teachers, test scores, and so forth. I see it all the time. The state sets them, here's where we think you should score. Here's how your kids scored last year. Here's how you should score this year. And I see these things, and I guess the question I would ask you, I know one thing I've learned from you, and it's really something I've taken off with in the last 10 years, and I've had a lot of success with, is you try not to be a liar. Okay. You really try to pride yourself on setting honest goals, speaking in honest statements to your kids to where they always know, good or bad, hey, this guy's telling me the truth. I can trust him. I can follow this because I know it's real. On that line, where have you been so successful in terms of not setting the bar too high? Because sometimes when you do set the bar too high, I'll have some people say, well, Shayne, you can really set yourself up to fail or to lose in terms of maybe gaining that momentum inside your program or inside a staff or so forth. So I guess my question to you is where have you found success in being honest? Now, in your case, there have been a lot of times in the last 10 years where there's only maybe a handful of teams on your schedule that are better than you. But I know, honestly, when you're coaching against a team that's simply better than you, some coaches I'll hear them say, we're better than this team, do this, and this.
Right.
And you're not. You know what I'm saying? Like, where have you always, because you've done a good job of this, where have you always found that ability to be very honest, to not to set your kids up for failure, while again finding that happy medium and pushing them to their fullest potential?
I guess the first thing I would say, let me go back to what you were talking about sort of at the beginning there, about, you were using the analogy of your golf game, right? And the setting. I mean, don't you think it comes down a little bit when you're setting expectations? It comes down to, one, everybody's kind of got a different personality on how they handle, expectations, or how they, for me, okay, I always hated when I was coming up through junior high, high school, whatever, I had a coach. I remember I had a coach when I was younger that used to say, no one believes you can win tonight, fellas. You're the underdog. Go in there. And now I'm sure that was his way of sort of trying to fire us up, right? And us versus the world type of thing. But I always kind of hated that, because I always felt like when he was calling us the underdog, what he was saying in essence is, you're not as good as these guys, and that always sort of bothered me. And maybe that's what he wanted it to do, right? Was tick me off and bother me. But like, I've always sort of hated being in that, like some people will say, oh man, I don't want to be picked. I don't want my team to be picked in the preseason to win the league. I'd rather be picked 4th or 5th and not have the expectations. Well, if you're picked 4th or 5th, that might mean that you're 4th or 5th. You're not very good.
Yeah.
I would rather be picked first, have the expectations, but also have the horses to run the race, right? Have the talent to work with to be able to accomplish something special, because the expectations, other people's expectations, really don't mean that much to me, because I put higher expectations on myself. You see what I'm saying? So
that's well said. Are you afraid we have some leaders out there that would rather be picked 5th and finish 4th than to be picked 1st and finish 2nd? You know what I mean? Because second's better, but it's that in terms of where you started, where you finished, it's that perception.
Well, it is, and I think too, I go back to, again, it could be sort of what your personality is, and then like in your golf analogy though, because I know your personality well enough to know that you're not afraid of expectations. You're not afraid to get in the middle of the fight, so to speak. You've coached baseball and basketball, and you've had teams that had higher expectations, and you didn't shy away from that. But I also know you well enough to know you may not be as confident in your golf game as you are as yourself as a baseball coach. I mean,
Right.
in all honesty,
Right.
sometimes it's what we're confident in, right?
Right.
So
No,
when you
sure.
go, you almost have to adjust your expectations a little bit based on confidence. I think sometimes when it comes to goal setting, though, like you talk about with your team, is you have to be careful not to set goals that either undershoot it, like we said, but you also got to be careful to not set goals in a way to where your kids look at it after a few games if things don't go well and say, well, what else do we have to play for? Coach
Right.
said it's win the league or bust, and we're 1-4 in the conference here and we can't win the league
Right.
anymore. Do we just quit or hang it up? And so I think you have to be careful when you set goals of, for me, it's always, and my high school coach did a lot of this, and I guess probably who I learned it from, but you set some short-term goals and then more long-term goals. I mean, we will a lot of times say things like, hey guys, we have 3 games over Christmas break. We're going to make this a 3-game season right now. Let's just focus on, can we go 3-0 in this 3-game season? The kids still know the long-term goals is we want to do well in the league and tournament, those things. But sometimes you shorten it to a little.
But if you don't, then you can start over and set another one.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, our goal was to go 3-0 over Christmas. We went 1-2. We had a bad stretch here. We need to get back in practice, fix this, because we've got 4 league games coming up, and our goal is to, you know what I mean? And you start breaking the season down into smaller sections and having those short-term goals
I like that
hopefully lead to your long-term goals. Because at the end of the day, you have to have something to play for all the time. The season's never over, and I think some people, I'll give you an example of, you just said some people are nervous about the expectations, right? The one that you'll hear athletes get asked, and you've heard this a million times, is this must win tonight? People will ask that question. Have you ever heard that question asked? And it kills me when athletes dance around this question. The answer to that is yes. Because every game's a must win. I mean, when's the last time you looked at a game and been like, if we lose, who cares, right? Yeah, it's a must win. People don't want to answer it that way because they're afraid of, well, if we lose, then my team will hear me say it's a must win. And, well, no, you go back to them the next day and say, last night was a must win, boys, and we blew it. Guess what? Tuesday's a must win. We got to get it. They're all must wins. Yeah. Because I think, don't you think this? Let me ask you this question. Do you think the best teams avoid the quote unquote big game mindset? Like, I've always felt like the best teams, every game's a big game. Like, you don't allow yourself to get in to it always bothers me when my players, and I've corrected them on this before, will say like, well, this coming up's a big game. Well, to say that, you imply that we have small games, right? We have meaningless games.
Right.
And I'm not buying that, and that's how upsets happen. That's how you end up beating the best teams in your league, but don't win the league because you get beat by 2 teams you shouldn't have, because you only get up for big games. Do you think like the best teams avoid that whole big game mentality and just treat everything as crucial?
Well, I do. But I think that what I'll add to that, Matt, is I think what happens is when your program, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, arrives, I think you, know it or not, you become everybody's big game, right? So it's that mentality of you put yourself in a position where it's a checklist, so to speak. This is the next step. This is the next step. This is the next step. And you're right. You play. There's something I wanted to share here because I think it applies here. I had it in my notes and I was looking for a position to throw it in. I think this is perfect. Last week's feedback on pet peeves, there's a couple I wanted to share with you. I think it goes here. One was can't win them all. You know what I'm saying? We had a good laugh about that.
You theoretically could.
Yeah, you could, because I'm glad the Miami Dolphins back in the 70s didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those where they did win them all. It's I'm not saying it's easy to win them all, but you can win them all, and it's okay when you win. How many times in Major League Baseball you get those first 2 wins, and that third one you're like, well, you got the series. This would be a real bonus. Well, no, you just beat them the last 2 days. What's wrong with beating them a third time? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's that urgency.
That's the word right there, urgency.
And I don't think sometimes we have, and that again with the expectation is what scares you a little bit in terms of, I'd like we'd win this series, win the 2 out of 3. Well, what happens when you win the first 2 is you don't have the same urgency. It's the same way with sales quota. They're same with test scores. All these things of leadership. There's a bar being set. Another one I had a good laugh was stay within yourself. It was a quote that people had down as pet peeve. We had a really good laugh about this as well. But I got to thinking it golf. Well, but in golf, get back to the golf analogy of, you know, I still think it's a really important cliche type of term for athletes to understand, because where it makes total sense to me is I was a good player in high school, certainly wasn't exceptional, but what made me good was I had an IQ where I understood exactly what I did well. And think about it, anytime on the golf course, like now as an adult, anytime in my golf game, I try to go outside of my talent level and do something I'm not capable of, the round can completely get away. If I'll quote unquote, I'll quote our high school golf coach here, Coach Dan Drummond, long time, still going in terms of great success at Uniota High School. He would always say, take your medicine, right? He would say, take your medicine, Shayne, chip out, put it in the right spot, play on, go. It's that stay within yourself to where there is something to be said to having an idea who you are, staying in your lane, and continuing to grind in a proper spot. Now, that kind of leads me to this next point. I say all that to say this: goal setting, when it comes to personal results, the way you self evaluate, don't you feel like confidence, borderline cocky, but I mean, confidence is a huge overlooked thing in leadership when it comes to self-evaluation and where you set the bar. If you are not, I think the people that are overwhelmed by the expectation from the outside are the people who maybe didn't expect a high enough level themselves. Don't you think self-evaluation in terms of what you think your team should accomplish, in terms of what you think your students should accomplish, or how many sales you think you should make in the business world, don't you think that's the root of the problem? Is leaders really struggle because they don't have the confidence in their ability or in the plan that they put out to attack that goal and to execute the plan properly.
Well, yeah, and what you're talking about there, though, is interesting, because what you're really saying is, when you're talking about executing a plan, you're talking about that process again, right? That we
Yeah, sure.
talked about a few
Yeah.
minutes ago. But like, see, sometimes the high expectations, it goes back. Let me go back. Let me backtrack here for just a second, because I was sitting there taking notes as you were talking. The why not, can't win them all, right? That one you were getting into. It reminds me of like an assistant coach we had in high school, Joe Griesheimer, who used to say, "Fellas, why not us? Somebody's got to win. Why not us?" Right? Every night, and it's almost like that attitude that you have to take of there's going to be a winner every single night. In your heart and mind, you're probably not winning every single game you ever play. Okay, we get that, but why would you ever go into a situation not believing that you could? I mean, someone's going to win the game. I'll never forget this. Just brought this to mind years ago. Bronson Arroyo, remember Bronson Arroyo, when he came over from the Boston Red Sox to the Reds. So you're talking quite a few years ago, because he had a good career at the Reds, obviously. When he came over, the one thing he said when he was asked, like, what's different here? He's like, well, it's just more laid back here. In Boston, you were expected to win every night, and here it's just more laid back. And I thought to myself, well,
That
yeah,
might be
that
the
might be the
problem.
problem. Bronson is like, that's why the Red Sox have a great franchise and the Reds don't, is because one group expects to win every night, and one group, even Castellanos, who they have now from the Cubs, right, said the same thing. I mean, if you remember, he said early in the season when he went from Detroit to Chicago last year, what was the improvement? The improvement was he was playing for a team that lost 100 games. All of a sudden, he went to a team that expected to win every night. What happened to his level of play? It went through the roof. So sometimes I think that the leader's level of expectations, don't you think it rubs off on the people? I can remember hearing a story about Mark Cuban when he first came to Dallas, the Dallas Mavericks, to own the Mavericks, and it was one of the worst franchises in all of sport.
Right.
Like one of the least valuable worst ran. And he immediately went in and started dressing up the locker room, giving his players things, making his players feel important. Set his office up right in the middle of all the people trying to sell season tickets. Just, hey, I'm right here with you. I'm going to cold call people just like you're going to. And all of a sudden he brought the level of expectation up to meet. Because don't you think one of the biggest challenges of a leader, Shayne, is to when you have a certain level of expectations, can you get your people's expectations to the same level as yours? That's sometimes really hard to do, because like you may be more confident in your team's ability than what they are, and can you get that level of expectation to that point where you need to get it?
Well, I think that's a great point, and I think the thing that makes me think of as a young coach, one thing I really struggled with, and I really learned from it, and I've been able to apply it in my teaching, I've been able to apply it in future coaching things, is how do you coach for the right now while still keeping that future in mind? And what I mean by that is, if you have an identity you hope your program is going to have, say 2 or 3 years from now, but at the current time you can't quite play that way, how do you go about competing every single night while still working for what you want the identity to be? Because what I hear some coaches say, and I know as a young head coach in basketball, I went through this, is you'd game plan, and you'd tweak this and you tweak that, and you'd grind 3.5 quarters in, and you'd lose some tough ones down the stretch. But then you'd step back at the end of that first year, that second year, and you'd be like, man, we've competed, but I just don't feel like the identity is what I want it to be. And what I've started to understand is, through the leadership, is you have to begin with that end in mind. You have to understand what it is you want to be at the end, and there has to be non-negotiables. There has to be those staples. And I know I remember a story you told one time, Matt, where you were struggling. I think it's that first job you were talking about, where you were struggling, and you were talking to a friend in coaching, and you were saying, I'm just not sure what to do Monday in practice. And go ahead and share what he said to you.
He said we were 0-7. We just got, it was my very first coaching job, and we had just got beat at the buzzer, and I thought we're never going to win a game, and I told my friend of mine who was also a coach, I said, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to tell these guys Monday at practice. And he says, you're going to tell them the same thing you told them last Monday at practice. Because he said, that's what you're supposed, you stick with. It's that process we're talking about, right? You stick with that process. You understand. You don't let the situation change you in that way. Again, are we happy about the results when you're 0-7? Well, no one should be. We're not asking you to be. But we're not quitting either. And again, it goes back, when you start talking about expectations, so much of that does, I think, hinge on confidence. And sometimes, you have to be reasonable in your expectations. I mean, I don't think it's easy to sit here and say, well, you should just have out of this world expectations all the time.
Right.
And sometimes that's a little unreasonable. Like you talked about golf, right? A lot of times, if you go into a round of golf and you say to yourself, hey, if I don't shoot 75 today, I'm going to be totally ticked off. Well, you may be setting yourself up for failure, because we don't go out and shoot 75 all the time.
Yeah, not unless I get a call after like the 15th hole or something. time to go. What you shoot? Well, I think it adds up to 75 there. We'll call her a day.
but I mean, yeah, I don't even know where to go from there. That's good though. But in all honesty, your expectations might be, okay, I don't know what I'm going to shoot today, but my goal is to play a smart round of golf. I don't want to make any mental mistakes. I want
the big score off the card. Don't
want to stay away from penalty shots, 3 putts, 2 chips, all those things we don't want. Right. And it's like, maybe that's your expectation rather than your actual score. And in some ways, if you have a team that is probably a ways away from being a championship level team, your expectations may be, hey, are we getting better every day? Or can we win 2 of these next 3? Those little short-term goals I talked about, right? But I do think, those expectations start with the leader. They have to be reasonable. They have to be something your team can rally around. And then they have to be ultimately something your team can buy into and believe. And that sometimes that's a challenge getting them to do that.
You mentioned buy-in, and I was just talking to a young coach the other day, and we were talking about how much in today's time you have to sell your program. A coach in so many ways is a salesman, and selling your product, getting them to want to be involved, motivating them to want to come to those workouts, to participate in those fundraisers, to do all the different things that small school programs need to be successful. And we got to looking at expectations, and we got talking about communication, because we spend a lot of time on expanding the zone here, Matt, talking about how you know what you sign up for. You have to understand you're going to be critiqued. People, and there's going to be a lot of people who are looking at expectations differently than you. You might be looking at a certain result where mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa might be looking at minutes played, might be looking at total shots, might be looking at how many innings pitched, how many, do you play all the way around in volleyball compared to just pass for 3 rotations?
Right.
So there's different things. I had something down here I wanted to ask you about communication. Yes, we know what we sign up for, but how important do you feel in today's time, part of managing not only your own expectations, but managing the expectations of your administration, the expectations of your kids, of your parents in the program? How much of communication throughout in terms of verbalizing your process, verbalizing your plan, do you think a coach has in terms of responsibility in today's time, far, far more than, say, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, the communication is the word there that's interesting. I think it's the key to it. I mean, in all honesty, as a coach, you mentioned like administration. As a coach, you should start to probably investigate their level of expectations during the interview process as early as that.
That's an interesting point.
And that way you can make a decision. From what I've seen, can my level of expectations match theirs? Maybe your level of expectations exceeds theirs. If you're told that, hey, you hopefully you can win 3 games next year, like I was, then maybe your expectations exceed that. But if you go in thinking, I think we've got an average team here, and they just told me that we got to win a district championship or it's a failure, well, then then maybe their expectations are a little out there. But so I think you investigate that early on. But then I think it's crucial, though, that whatever your expectations are, obviously that you immediately start verbalizing those to your team so that they get on board with it. They start to whether they believe in it right away or not, they start to kind of process it in their mind a little bit, and they can start to wrap their head around it. And hopefully as practice starts and as they start to see results and they start to see things, then they start to come around a little bit, and I think sometimes with your parents or your fans, things like that, I think the expectations sometimes they're different in the sense that it's not really based on results and stuff for them. Is hey, here's my expectations of how, like as a coach, my expectations of what role we need you to play as a parent, what we need you to do, for this team to reach this level and for us to be successful as we can be. We talked about that, I think, in one of our other shows with communication and preseason parent meetings and really kind of communicating that stuff. So, the communication, I think, piece of it's crucial, because let's face it, who cares what your expectations are if nobody else, if you can't communicate that to the people you're leading.
Yeah, it really is. And, that kind of brings me right up to the brink of final thoughts this week, because that kind of clears out my notes. And I think this is a great topic. It was one that we really, really needed, because out of everything we've talked about in leadership, we really hadn't talked about expectations probably in the detail that we need to. And I guess my final thought comes back to the point of understanding what it is you want to accomplish. I still think it comes back to self-expectation, self-evaluation first. You have to understand there's going to be outside noise. Some outside noise is uncontrollable. That's the part you sign up for. I do think that there's outside noise that does matter in terms of your parent involvement, parent communication to those kids, and then you being on the same page with the kids, you having expectations. What does the administration need from me? What do I need from them? And having that working relationship. I think those are the lines of things that become very, very important. And the bottom line of it is if you evaluate yourself as a sports fan, I think it's a really fun way to evaluate yourself on a more serious matter as a leader. Because when I do it as a fan, I find myself I find myself really, really frustrated based on what I wanted to have happen compared to what happened. The times where I didn't really expect much going in, I find my glass half full. The times where I thought, oh my goodness, I never even dreamed it would be this bad, I find it half empty. I'm negative. You know what I'm saying? And it's completely based on what I thought going in. That could be my favorite player, that could be playing fantasy football, that could be anything in terms of expectation versus results. And if you can kind of find that fun way of evaluating and then apply it to your land of leadership, I think what you'll find is oftentimes it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to model it. And if you model it, I think that's the first step of I think you used the Dallas Mavericks example really, really well there of you put it out there and you set a standard and you push everybody along. That's where the great success can take place. So I think like so many things that I've learned from expanding the zone as I study these topics, some people want this to be the answer. Some people want that to be the answer. And what I keep telling people is if you're being open minded, there's probably a little bit of this and a little bit of that that you need in order to be very, very successful in whatever it is you're trying to do in leadership. So, Matt, on that note, I'll kind of throw it over to you and ask final thoughts. This is a topic that just made a lot of sense to me at this point of our process of expanding the zone in terms of what we're trying to put out there for the fans to think about.
Yeah, my final thoughts. I'll say this. I'll end it kind of the way I started it with this. That I'm a big believer in high expectations. I just think that you have to have, as a leader, high expectations in order to ever really accomplish anything great. Now, can it take a while maybe to get there? Sure, but I still think you said it earlier with like the Stephen Covey thing, right? Begin with the end in mind. I think it was like one of the habits of
Leader in me. Yep.
yeah, right. You begin with the end in mind. So when you have those high expectations, you may not be really good right away, but you have this end picture of, man, I want to get there and I'm not getting there without high expectations. So I think you start the expectations right away. You sort of, as we were always told growing up, you sort of get out of it what you put in it, right? So you insert these high expectations. This is the way we're going to do it. You have to have ways of encouraging your people through the difficult times that you're going to have, especially if you're not ready to accomplish those high expectations quite yet, and maybe you're a couple years away or whatever. But you're not going to lower those though, right? I mean, you're going to keep those expectations. This is where we want to get. And it's funny right now with the decisions our leaders are faced with during this pandemic. If you don't operate with the end in mind, you're going to drive yourself a little bit crazy with this, because if you think about it, our leaders right now are making decisions which a certain level of failure is inevitable. I mean, it just is, because no matter what decision you make, you better believe there's going to be outside criticism. We know that. Okay. So you're going to be faced with that. You're probably going to be in a situation as we start school or we have sports to think that there's never going to be a positive test. There's never going to be that's naive, right? We know some of these things are going to happen. So that's that inevitable failure I'm talking about. But I think you have to ask yourself as a leader, are the decisions we're making right now, what's it going to look like a year from now, or at the end of this school year, or a year from now, or whatever? That's when you're probably going to judge whether the decisions you made are correct. And I think that's why you have to make those decisions right now based on that end picture. And I think your expectations have to be high. Hey, we're going to accomplish this. We're going to do this. But to understand there's going to be some failures along the way. And that's kind of how it is in coaching too, right? I mean, hey, we want to reach this end thing, but to think that there's not going to be some trip ups along the way is naive. So I guess that's where I would leave it is high expectations are crucial. I don't think you should forfeit those. I don't think you should give in on those. But I think you have to be creative as a leader in along the way. How do you handle failure? How do you keep your people motivated and not feeling like all is lost, right, during a tough time, and those things. Those are sort of the tricks of the trade, I guess.
But I would almost extend final thoughts to say this and almost ask you to comment on this. I'd been given a couple compliments on several shows back where I'd put in the idea of leadership. I talked about informing yourself and making decisions and evaluating and kind of accepting that critique. Don't you think sometimes in expectations and in goal setting, it's people's ability to say, oh, whoa, that didn't work. Let's try again. I heard you talk about small sections of the season.
Right.
Don't you kind of think that's another important piece to reiterate here in final thoughts of sometimes as leaders, we just mess up and we have to evaluate that and start over. Don't you think some people kind of get stubborn and be like, no, we're going to do this, and this. It's also okay along the way to tweak the plan.
Yeah.
Understand, hey, that didn't work. Let's try it this way. Don't you think there's a real valuable thing to make sure we talk about that here in final thoughts as well?
Yeah, there's a fine line, I think. Don't you think there's a fine line between conviction and stubbornness?
That's well said.
Standing your ground versus just becoming so bullheaded that you won't listen to reason. You don't adjust. I guess that's an important part of leadership is, you used the word non-negotiables earlier. There has to be some of those, but at the same time, you have to be flexible. There has to be some adaptation. I mean, we've learned over the last few months, right? If you don't adapt, you don't constantly be willing to open your mind to change, it's going to be hard to be successful in today's world because it's just changing all the time.
I think that's well said. One of my favorite sayings in leadership is I study it more and more. You'll hear me say it on the show every now and then. Not trying to be right, I'm trying to get it right. And I think that's really, really important. So a lot of fun, good show. Love to hear feedback. I've really enjoyed the feedback on the pet peeves and some different things. I shared some of them here tonight. A couple I didn't get to there. A couple Michigan fans, Matt, want you to go easy on some of the negativity there.
Good luck with that. I think the whole Big Ten's going to go easy on it this year, from what we found out today. But
I think you're right. But fans, listeners, there, if you have some comments for us, a lot of different ways you can get involved. You'll see us out there on social media. Just follow SVC Sports Zone, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can email me at admin1@svcsportzone.com and continue to look us up there on our YouTube, SVC Sports Zone. Shayne, obviously all 19 shows now of Expanding the Zone will be out there. You'll also start to see some other clips called SVC Sports Talk Plus, the conference that I cover on svcsportzone.com, starting up with some golf, some volleyball. So you'll see some extra clips there for our local listeners. But again, for some of our listeners outside of our conference area, you'll continue to get the Expanding the Zone coverage here by following us on the YouTube. So, Matt, a lot of fun. Look forward to it. I know there's still 2 or 3 really, really important shows that we have coming up somewhere in the near future, just trying to find the right place for them so that the timing is right in terms of when people want to hear them and need to hear them. And then obviously what makes this so fun is sometimes we come up with, we think a show's going to be on this and we end up changing it the night before just because we think something's really, really important. So that's what we want to continue to do. So on that note, Matt, I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support out there. And keep giving us your feedback, and we'll continue to keep talking leadership here on Expanding the Zone. Thanks, everyone.